Good day, everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 of React, and I'm here with my navigator, Sibu. How are you, Sibu?
Hey guys. Hey guys, I'm good.
Alright, cool. Chapter 7, getting data from RESTful APIs with Axios. So let's jump into it. So basically, working with APIs and getting data from those API endpoints is what we were working on today. And so basically, what is an API? Firstly, so an API is a application programming interface, so a set of rules and specifications that allow different software applications to communicate and exchange data with each other. So it's basically an endpoint where you can retrieve data from. So basically, two applications exchanging data with each other. And an API request is basically a message that is sent by the client, right? So it's basically like the web application sending a request to a server, right? So usually this comes in the form of a GET request if you want to retrieve specific data. So when a GET request is sent to the server, right? And where the API is basically hosted, then that request, right? After that request is sent, a response is given back, which is the data that we need, essentially. So that's basically how APIs work. So we have our SPA over here, right? And basically here we are trying to retrieve data from the GitHub API endpoint. Do that by inputting a specific name to get specific users based off this search. And when I click search, this is the data I get. Because that GET request was sent to the API endpoint, and it has given us this data as a response based off the search. So that's basically how the API works. Let's see how it works in the code. So over here I have my index.js. As you can see, I've imported this component named GitHub, and essentially I have attached this component here in this JSX tag over here within my render function. So let's have a look at what this GitHub component is doing. So firstly, here I've imported Axios in order to help with the API request to retrieve data. Imported React loading, which is basically the loading that happens in between the request sent to the API endpoint and the response given back. Then this is just bootstrap styling. So we have our class GitHub and our component class, which makes our GitHub component. Then we have a constructor. Within it we have this .state. This sets the state of the data search term and is loading. So as you can see, it's a dictionary, and we have key value pairs. Data is basically storing the GitHub user's results based off that search that we make, right? Then the search term stores what the user types. Then is loading is set to false, so it shows a spinner when waiting for an API, for the data that we requested. Then we have a handle change function over here, and this handle change function basically updates the search term state as the user types in the input box, right? So the search term is stored in this parameter over here, and then the state is set to whatever value is put in the search box. Then we have a handle submit function, which basically runs when the form is submitted, basically. So as soon as the form is submitted, this function is executed. Then there's the set state function within it, or set state method, and it sets is loading to true. So sets is loading to true, and then it shows that spinner. So basically, like when you search and it shows that spinner that was showing now, that means that it's loading because it's set to true. Then GitHub data, right? Get GitHub data for the specific instance. So for the specific person that is searching for that data, right? So this function is basically called get GitHub data is over here, and it's this function. So basically in here we have as a parameter search term, and it obviously stores the values that you input in the input box to search for a specific user. Then we use Axios, right, to basically send that GET request to the API endpoint. Attached to it is the search term. The search term is basically that request being made, right? So when we search here for specific users, right, and click search, that's the request being made based off the search term to this API endpoint, right, to get the data. In here we have then dot then, right, which is a promise with a parameter in this callback function, or this arrow function with the parameter response. And basically in here we're changing the state to no longer loading, so we set the state to false in the set state function. And then data is set to res data.item, so it displays the users on the web page, right? It displays all the users that we search for. That's why it shows over here after we make the search. So that means it was successful, that we retrieved the data from the API endpoint after the request was made. Then this just prints the results to the console. Here we use .map, to loop over the data array to display each GitHub user. And that's why there's an image as well, right, for that user, the login and the ID. So as we can see here, we see the image of the user, the login, as well as the ID attached to that specific user. Then we have here this return method within a div. So here it's rendering the UI, so the user interface, so it's rendering the data that should be shown in the front end. And that data that is shown is a form, right? It comes as a form where the user enters the GitHub username to search. So obviously before the data is shown, right? So before all of this data is shown, it's first a normal form, essentially. So it's just a normal form where you can input the specific search that you need to input in order to get the data that you need. So over here we have this render, this return function, right? And within it we have form over here, this form tag, meaning that it's going to be a form, handle submit function for the specific instance, and a placeholder as well. And you can see handle change function being called, as well as handle submit function. And this allows us to search the users that we need. So this is the search button. And then here in this h3 tag we have GitHub user results, and then underneath it shows basically all the users after we search for the specific users or get that data from the API endpoint. And that's basically how it works, mainly with this this API endpoint over here, and that GET request being made with Axios. So as soon as we search here, and we click search, that GET request is made to the server, and then it gives us all this data from the API endpoint as a response. And yeah, that's a summary of chapter 7.